I mean, what is this mythical beast called the roadie?
Well, first and foremost, probably a masochist. Only kidding, only kidding. No, a roadie, I mean, the term sort of got a bit of it's got a bit of a bad taste to it these days. Everyone goes, oh, roadie, you know, but that's what we were in the beginning. You know, that's where we all started. We started as roadies. And what that meant was we were the people that would turn up wherever it was, the band's house or wherever. We'd load all the equipment into a truck or a van or whatever it was, and we'd take it to the venue, then we'd set it all up again, and then we'd break it down and do it all over again. And then as the years went by, it got more and more complicated, and then we started structuring with different departments, and you know, then you became a backline person, so you focused on the stage equipment. Then you became a sound engineer, and you did either on stage monitors or front of house, and lighting was the other one. Then you got electricians, then riggers. So all of these departments popped up, but what we are at together as a unit are the people behind the scenes that do all the work, right, basically.
Now, your own journey, I mean, you know, I love the fact that, you know, you wanted to go to Woodstock, and the fact that you were kind of young and kind of in Queensland meant that you were never going to get to Woodstock, right? But then you ended up in, you know, you headed off and you ended up in Nimbin. And before we get to roading, I've always loved the fact that you encountered whilst in Nimbin Philippe Petit, who was, of course, the guy who walked across the Twin Towers buildings on a tightrope, you know, whilst you were in Nimbin. I mean, just purely by chance, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I was just wandering around. I'd gone down there with a group of people. I was 15 years old. I'd gone down there and, you know, nothing was going to keep me from this. I mean, I was 11 when I thought I was going to Woodstock. It was a no-brainer for everyone apart from me. Not that I even knew where Woodstock was, mind you, from boarding school where I was at the time. But so when the talk of Nimbin came up, off I went, and I wasn't going to tell anyone. I just packed a little bag and ran away from home. So that was it, me gone. And, you know, I was walking around one day and there was this chap just walking between two of the buildings. And it's like, what is that? You know, and I found it fascinating. And he didn't speak or anything. And obviously then I found out that he was French. And so, you know, he wasn't much of a talker anyway. He focused on doing all of these extreme, you know, stunts basically. And then I sort of befriended them all because I found it fascinating, and I found it fascinating watching them rigging it and setting it up. And then they'd move to another part of the field somewhere and do it between two trees, or, you know, whatever they could rig from, they'd rig from. So I found it really fascinating. And then when I heard they were going to Sydney, it was like, ooh, can I come? So
Right.
count me in. It was a double bonus because I'd never been to Sydney, and I'd get to see him walk across the two pylons on the end of Sydney Harbour Bridge. So I was happy. I was in, and inadvertently, I was taking part in what would be my first production, even though it wasn't music. It was still a production, you know. So it was fascinating.
And you were a participant, you know, albeit a bit player in a historic moment of him walking across the northern pylons, was it, of Sydney Harbour Bridge?
Absolutely, yeah, it was the northern pylons. And you know, it took, you know, there was about a week of planning, and they had blueprints for the bridge, and they went off to scrap metal yards to get different pipes and stuff, and they got all the steel cables and everything. And you know, because obviously he didn't bring all that from Europe with him. So it was quite a huge venture, and it took days of going backwards and forwards between the bridge. We were on the North Shore somewhere. I think it was Whale Beach or Palm Beach. I can't remember which one. I think it was Whale Beach. So we'd make the trek down to the bridge each day, and, you know, different bits of equipment would get carried up to the top, you know. So it was quite fascinating, really. I mean, my job was to run with the film once they dropped it, you know, because everyone knew they were going to get arrested and busted and stuff, but they wanted to save the film. So, you know, my job was to sort of be down on the ground level on the bridge. And then once he got to a point where he turned around and came back over and lay down, once he lay down, which was just mind-blowing to watch, it was like, what's he doing? That was just fascinating. But that's when we scooted over the side, and then that's where they dropped the film over the side. And then we had a getaway car ready to go, and we took off with the film. So, yeah.
So you were effectively learning all of the skill set that you would need for the next decades in rock and roll, but with by embarking on this escapade, right? So as you described the setup, I'm thinking, God, that's what road crews do. You know, we go off and get this, we get this, we find this, we do this. You know.
Absolutely. I mean, it was a great model to start with. You know, the only thing missing was the music.
Right. So let's talk about the music. You know, you're in Sydney, and you know, hanging around King's Cross, and how did you get involved with this? You know, working with bands. I mean, was it just a bit of good luck, or?
Well, you know, I think it was desperation, really. It was, I got myself in a bit of trouble in King's Cross. I've been warned to stay away. I'd come out of the rainforest. So I had this hippie, everyone's wonderful attitude. But the King's Cross in the 70s was not that. It was definitely not that. And it was a rough place. It was a dangerous place. And, you know, I'm wandering around making friends with the world, you know, and I got myself into a bit of trouble with some really nasty people who, you know, basically I got kidnapped at gunpoint, and I decided that would be a good time once I escaped from that. I decided that would be a good time to get the hell out of the cross. And a couple of young girls who I moved in with to get away from that other side of the cross took me to my first gig, so to speak, which was at the Whiskey A Go-Go. And that's where I met someone who had a really strong influence as both a friend and mentor for the rest of his life, and, you know, many, many decades. And that was Wayne Swampy Jarvis. And, you know, I went to this show, and basically, you know, he's introduced himself and, you know, so how you do, you know, and like, so you like the band? I said, I don't know who the band is, you know, and he says, well, do you want to watch the show? Yeah. So he said, I'll put you here. And he put me next to the front of house sound console. But at the time, I didn't know that's what it was, because, you know, I'd had no experience. I just saw these two guys there, and they were sort of doing stuff. And then, you know, once the band went on stage, you know, I'm sort of watching, and what became really apparent to me was everyone but the band, funnily enough. It was like, I noticed that, you know, there were people passing things up on the stage, or, you know, if a mic stand fell over or something, someone would come over and set it up again. And so I noticed all these people coming on and off stage doing stuff, but not playing instruments or singing, you know. So when a break came up between sets and Swampy came back and said, you know, what do you think of it? You know, and I said, oh, you know, it's good. But who are these people? You know, and he's gone, oh, they're the roadies, you know. So that was the first time I heard the word. And it was like, roadies. And then he goes that they're leaving, you know, they're going to be leaving and going down to Melbourne and then to Adelaide. So traveling with the band. And I'm like, hang on a minute. So you travel with the band, you listen to music, and you get paid. Oh, I'm in. You know, it was like, this is good for me, because I'm doing two of these things anyway. I'm just not getting paid. Yeah. So I thought this could be a good break, you know.
So and starting to do sound, that was equally, you were just around and observing and watching what was going on.
Yeah, well, I started off doing backline.
Yes.
And when I started with Acdc, I was still doing backline, but we got to a point where we needed a louder PA system for Bond's voice. We had to get Bond's vocals up over the backline sound that was just so, the guitars were just so loud. So they sent me off to this place called Nova, and to pick up a PA. And I thought I was just picking it up. I didn't realize it was going to become my PA. So, you know, I pick it up and I bring it back, and, you know, we get to the first show and we're setting it up, and it's like, okay, so you're going to do the front of house sound now. And it's like, wait, what? Hang on, I've never done sound. I don't know how to do sound, you know. And they're like, well, you know, it's pretty basic, you know, and you know, you'll figure it out. And the thing is, we want you to do it because you know what the band wants. You know their sound, you know the sound they want, and it's easier than trying to train someone else to do it. Well, easier for them, I'm thinking. You know? But it's like, okay, I'll try it.
So let's backtrack a little. So you were around Melbourne, and around Sydney, and then you found yourself in Melbourne, and that's when you encountered, you know, Bill Joseph, who, you know, suggested that you go and meet Michael Browning, who had this band.
Absolutely.
Had this name called Acdc.
That's right. Bunch of young boys. They worded it. There's a bunch of young boys moving down from Sydney. We need a road crew person for them, and you'll all get to live in the same house, and we'll pay you $60 a week. Woohoo! I thought that was fabulous. Got me out of my mother's house, thank God. And I got $60 a week. It was like, oh, sign me up.
Well, $60 in those days was actually not bad money. That was okay, right? So
well, I don't know how good it was, but it was good to get out of the house.
yeah.
That was my thing.
And what, just tell us, hanging around, very young, emerging ACDC, and also, being a woman in that world. I mean, how accepting were they? How did you find it? How did you deal with that?
They were really accepting. They really, really were. And I think it was like the young family have this strong family morale, so to speak, and they have strong female women in their family. Mm-hmm. So, they're respectful, and, and they listen to, they'll listen to a woman when she speaks, and, as long as they've got something worth saying. But, so I think it was kind of good for them to have a female, because they were used to having that. Angus had never lived away from home, and I'm not even sure Malcolm had, actually. So I think the philosophy behind it all was, she's a female, they might stop them from being quite so homesick or whatever, and she can load the truck. So, hey, what are you going to do?
And I mean, did you, have any sense in those days of how important what you were part of, not just observing, I mean, you were part of it, would be? I mean, you're with ACDC for, a very, very formative part of their career. You're with them when they first appear on Countdown. You're on the road with them, and you're not just, you're the person who is responsible for how they sound on stage when they're playing, Festival Hall and all of those, very, very significant things. But did you have any sense that this was, an important part of music history?
When I first walked into that house on Lansdowne Road, Michael Browning took me after I'd been at Mushroom House and I'd said, yes, I'd be interested. He scooped me up and said, well, they're in town for another day. Then they're going back into the studio in Sydney. So come to the house, let's go now. So when I walked into that house, in the room was Malcolm, Angus, Bon, George, and Harry Vander. So I sort of walked in and I sort of held back, and Michael went over and, shook everyone's hands and, was schmoozing. And I sort of stood back and was looking, and I was kind of confused because there was two distinct age groups. There was Malcolm and Angus that were more my age group, a little older, but not a lot. And then there was Bon, George, and Harry, and I'm like, so what's going on here? I'm trying to figure it out, without, looking too stupid. So, Brother George introduced us all, and then it all came into place, it fell into place. But where I'm going with this is, from that very day, there was an energy in that room that you could taste it. I mean, it was really, really strong. And it's like, whatever's going on here, I want to be a part of it. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is yet, but I want to be a part of it. And then from moving into the house and watching their work ethic and the way that they conducted themselves professionally, music-wise, I'm not talking about when they're socialising and playing and stuff like that, but when they're actually doing music and whether they're rehearsing, whether they're writing or whatever they were doing, it was an amazing time to be there. It really, really was. And I firmly believe that's where I got my strong work ethic from, those early days with them, and I thank them for that.
And you were working, and they were working ridiculously hard in those days.
It was a nightmare. It was a nightmare. I mean, an easy week would be 10 shows.
Wow, it's amazing, isn't it?
So yeah, and a couple of times we did 14 shows. Now, when we say 14 shows, they're not in the same building. They're all over town. They're all over, or even as, like outside of the city that you're in, we're in Melbourne, and so it'd be like Geelong. We'd go down to Geelong and then come back and catch the last set at 2:00 in the morning, at like the Hard Rock or something. We were driving all over the place, and it was just mad dashes the whole time. And one of those mad dashes, the brakes went out on the truck and we rammed into a tram. Thank God the tram was there to stop us, and it trashed the truck, and like the peak flew out of the truck and the equipment's all on the street. So we had to pull everything back. And this is where the the bus came from. It was like, oh, well, we can't have this. We need to get you guys a driver. And if we get a bus, then the band and the crew can travel together and all the equipment in the back. Well, sounded great, but what a nightmare that was. I hated that bus. I really did.
I was going to ask you about totaling the truck, but you've already gone there. But no, that's okay. I mean, because it was very, very hard. There was so much traveling, on roads that were nothing like they are today. Crews, yourself and other people around you. I mean, you were really going into, uncharted territory, and really putting yourselves on the line with those overnighters to get from, one city to another city and set up and do all the gigs,
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we'd take turns sleeping in what we would do with, like, once I'd left ACDC and I was with ACT, which was Paul Dainty's company, the crews would, we were doing just international tours. The crews would have rent-a-cars and we'd drive rent-a-cars between cities for the next show. And we just take turns, like sleeping in the car, and when you were too tired to drive anymore, you'd wake someone else up and it was their turn to drive. And then you go straight to the venue and start the load in. So you never really slept, It was, that's how I learned to drive. I learned to drive in a rent-a-car between Melbourne and Sydney one night because everyone else was exhausted. And I used to stay awake on the passenger seat so I could hit the driver when he was falling asleep. I'd stay awake. So I'd be like, wake up, you're coming off the road, stop it. And then this one day, the guy just pulled over, Win Nelson actually, just pulled over and he says, you're going to have to drive. And he got out and he sort of pushes me over and he jumps in the passenger seat. And I'm like, and he's straight to sleep. And I'm like, I've never driven a car before. So wow. It was like, okay. It was an automatic. So it's, and I'd watched because I'd been like, I'd been the co-pilot for so many of these runs that I just did it. And I started driving and, the trucks used to flash each other. If there were police up ahead, they'd flash or they'd do this with the indicators so you could go past them if it was clear. And so I got all this down and I thought it was a trucker, I'm like, but once we hit the outskirts of Sydney and the sun was up, I freaked out because there was traffic everywhere. And I just went, oh God, and just pulled over and woke him up again. I said, you've got to drive. And he's like, why? He says, just go to the Hordern Pavilion. I said, no, I can't. And he's like, what do you mean you can't? It's like, I've never driven before. I don't know how. And he's like, what? so anyway, it was, and I continued to drive for years without getting a license.
and I've always I'm not sure if loved is the right word, but I found quite illuminating talking about women in the music industry and women in the world of crewing, and you were, breaking a whole lot of barriers with what you're doing. And when you went to Sunbury and they wouldn't let you go backstage, and I think it was Scrooge who came. Yeah. Can you just tell people that story?
Absolutely. That was ACDC. That was the show that didn't happen. We're supposed to play before Purple, and Purple got shitty with us and decided they wanted to go on first and we'd have to close the show after them. But they were going to take all of their equipment away, which would have added hours to it. And it was just ridiculous. And it's like, no. So ACDC stood their ground, and more power to them. I really respected that they did that. Bit of a brawl broke out. But before we got to the stage, we pulled up backstage area and I've gone, well, I'll head straight up to the stage and get the equipment, ready to be set up so that we're in good shape. The band took off to, I think, what was one dressing room for everyone apart from Deep Purple. So they went right, I went left. And just as I was trying to get through this entrance to the backstage area, there's this big security guy, with his arms crossed. And he's like, where do you think you're going, little girl? Go on, off you go, like shooing me away. I'm like, no, you don't understand. Here's me, my naivety. No, you don't understand. I'm with the band. I'm with ACDC. And he's like, I don't care who you're with. Whoever you're with, then you best go find them. Go on, coming here. And it's like, no, you don't understand. I work for them. And it's like, and he was getting quite aggressive and he's like pushing forward. And I'm like, Lord, And then finally, one of the guys saw it from up on the stage, on the side of the stage, and Scrooge, he yells down, hey, mate, no, she's with us. She's their roadie, and security guy just looked at me, and you think he just stepped in something. He's like, he wasn't happy. And it's like, it's not above your pay grade, mate. Leave me alone. Just ran in, but that happened a lot, and you just learn, you learn how to get around it, because otherwise you're going to spend your whole time fighting your way in and out of venues, which just gets you all wound up, and then you have a bad day, so you have to figure out a way to get around it,
We're going to move on in a minute to when you leave Australia, but you talked earlier about Wayne Jarvis, and you've just mentioned Scrooge, and obviously in that era, there were Howard Freeman and Win Milson and a whole lot of those quite now legendary people like yourself, part of Australian road crew. How important were some of those, guys to your learning and the support and embracing you as part of what was, let's face it, it was a male world,
Yeah, it was integral. I mean, if I didn't have support by the people who were at the top of their game, I would not have survived. It didn't matter how good I was, I would not have survived, and that was the thing with Acdc. I was doing all the pub gigs and, the odd, festival hall or Hordern Pavilion or whatever. But, there's a lot of crew there, that excellent crew people, but they're all hungry and they're all out for another gig, and they're all, wanting that sort of thing. So it was a bit of a, can I say it, shit fight? Yep. and it was like,
you just did, and yes.
Just did, yeah, okay. And, almost on a daily basis. I mean, there were people there who worked for other bands who had met me and knew me or had been told about me by these people. So I did have a support system, but without that, I would not have been able to continue. Just wouldn't have happened. And, I think, they kept me. I think they kept me. I think it was like, you get this little kitten that comes in and you give it a saucer of milk, and then all of a sudden it won't go away. And what the hell are you going to do with it now? I think that was me. They're like, well, she does the job and she's quite good at it. She's actually really good at it. And she's learning all the time and she's keen. Well, I guess we'll just keep her.
Now, in hindsight, Tana, this was just the beginning of your career, and you document the whole, it all in loud. But the one thing, for people who don't know your story, I just have to ask you one question. You have been the sound person for one of the biggest bands in rock history, and you start to think that it's time to move on. How old were you when you finished working with Acdc?
Oh, I was 17.
Right, okay.
Yeah, 17, yeah. So I was like an old hand at that point.
That still amazes me. It's just, so look, you finished with Acdc. You did some other things in Australia, but your real desire was to get overseas to experience, what was happening outside of this country.
It was, yeah, because again, the Wayne Swampy Jarvis, who I spoke about in the beginning there, he'd just been given a job with Status Quo, and he'd moved to England. And I'd just done a Neil Diamond tour after I'd done back-to-back with a Carlos Santana tour. And the Santana crew offered me to the Neil Diamond crew as part of the American crew. So I had this sort of taste of it now. And it's like, no, I want to see what else is out there, what else is going on in the big wide world, because all of the news was coming, about new equipment and new techniques and all that sort of stuff was coming in from these international tours. So I thought, well, I want to go to the place where it's actually happening, so that was my goal, and I thought, well, if I can do these international tours and people are referring me from one tour to another, then, maybe I can work over there as well, so I thought I'd give it a shot.
Mm-hmm. And you worked with Status Quo for an extended period of time.
I did, yeah. I'd done one tour with them in Australia before I left, and then after I moved over, I had a bit of a low slump in London when I first got there. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anywhere to live. I'd sleep like, one night I'd be house sitting David Essex's house on Abbey Road, and the next, a few days later, I'd be sleeping on a park bench somewhere. And, you know, I did that. I made it difficult for myself because I didn't want to tell people that I didn't have any money and I didn't have a job. And, you know, I didn't want to be a burden to anyone. So, I mean, I could have made it easier for myself, but it all worked out in the long run. You know, I was sleeping in one of Paul McCartney's cars for a while. So, I mean, even the slumming was quite good. You know? But then,
And was there again? I mean, Swampy was over there, but again, you know, you were still a young woman working, you know, in that male crew. I mean, were there other women starting to emerge in road crews that were comrades in this sort of caper, or were you still out there on your own?
I didn't see any women until like early 80s was when I first, and they'd be like either follow spot operators in a theatre in-house, and I think early 80s, maybe 82, I saw there was a woman who was a stagehand. So, you know, it was starting. There was obviously a start happening. There was something happening, but most females at the time would work in the warehouse at a place, and they were usually someone's girlfriend or wife or whatever, and that's how they'd sort of come into it, and which is fine. But a lot of them, you know, well, the few that there were didn't tour. So I never saw anyone tour until I actually did a tour with an Australian girl, Debbie Vincent, and that was in 1983, I think. 1983 with Elton John. I put her on the crew with me because she came over from Australia with a good friend of mine, Mary Took. And so we put him out on Neil Young, and I took her on Elton John with me. But that was the first time it's the only time I ever toured with another female.
And it sounds, I mean, were there times, I mean, you know, you're saying you're sleeping on benches, you're roughing it in Paul McCartney's car, but were there moments when you questioned why you were doing this, or was it just so much part of your makeup at this point that you were just what you did?
Yeah, no, I wasn't going to fail. I mean, I looked at that as failure. You know what I mean? So I didn't look at sleeping on a park bench as failure. I looked as if I packed up my little bag, called my dad and said I need a ticket home, that would have been failure. And I probably would never have gone back to doing it in Australia even. So it was a make or break situation for me. And there just was no choice. I was just going to persevere until something happened. And what happened was Status Quo decided they were going to build their own lighting and sound system.
Yeah.
So I came in and was in charge of building the lighting system. So, you know, and then, you know, that left me with them for like 3-4 years to follow. So it was a good thing.
And technology was changing fairly rapidly in those days. I mean, that would be
absolutely. It was every day there was something new happening or something evolving. So, you know, whether it was trussing, whether it was aluminum cans instead of steel cans, you know, whether it was multi-pin sockets, you know, or whatever it was just happening so quickly and on such a huge scale. I believe that also helped me because it leveled the playing field, because anything that I didn't know, no one else knew either, because it was that new, you know, so it couldn't be like, oh, she's a female and she doesn't know it. It's like, I think people were too busy trying to cover their own butts, you know, going, Jesus, I've got to learn this. What is it, you know? And I've always been a great one for showing people and teaching people things. So, you know, and from building that rig from scratch, I'd learned a lot, you know, so I would always pass that information on, you know, so that put me in a position where I became rather quickly a crew chief.
Right, and therefore in demand, because I mean, a lot of crew have a very precarious, I mean, and probably yours was still precarious in those days, precarious lifestyle. I mean, you know, there's never been holiday pay in the world of crews, and only recently there's been superannuation and stuff, you know, and it's an unforgiving lifestyle that seems from the outside to be quite glamorous, you know. I mean, was it psychologically tough going at various times?
It is psychologically tough because, you know, road crew people are alpha types. You know, we're a bunch of alphas. You get a bunch of alphas in a room and they're going to outdo each other, you know, so, and strive to do better. And there's going to be no excuses taken. There's going to be, no breaks given. So you find yourself working harder and harder and longer just to prove yourself, that you're as good as or better. I mean, and I always felt that I had to be better as a female to be accepted as an equal, which is fine. I mean, that's just how it was, So, and, it's still a bit that way today. But luckily there's more girls out there, more women out there doing it. So, people are gradually coming around to the thought process.
And you were, from reading loud, for the most part, you've been fortunate in that you've worked with people that you have a great deal of affection for as human beings and musically. There have been some exceptions. What's it like, when you're going out and having to be so integral to the performances and the touring of artists where you don't get on with them, or you don't respect them, or you don't like them musically? I mean, is that hard to front up every night and every day?
That's where the rest of the crew comes in.
Right.
If you've got a good crew, you can put up with anything, as long as the crew's good. The band can be a pack of idiots, and I mean, ideally you don't work for a band that you don't have some sort of connection to, either you like their music or they're decent people or whatever. But it does happen. I mean, it's a job, it still is a job. But I would always choose a good crew over a maybe more famous band or a hot band. It's like, you have a choice, say that, you can go out with you can go out with Led Zeppelin, or you can go out with I'll just say Status Quo because we talked about them earlier. So what do? I mean, Zeppelin's crew were a good crew, but they were hard, and they were different. They were sort of like a secular bunch. They really were. And so I never felt real comfortable there, but I always felt really comfortable with Quo. So I would choose a Quo as opposed to trying a Zeppelin. Does that make sense?
Yes. And what Tana, what makes a good crew? I mean, is it that camaraderie? Is it the support for each other? Having someone's back when things, are not going so well?
I think it all starts with respect, and then from that you get the camaraderie. You get your back. We've got your back. You've got each other's back, and it's just, you're in such a confined space. You're living in each other's pockets for anything up to 12 months, 18 months now. You can go out on a tour, a world tour can take 18 months. They keep throwing in countries, but, until recently anyway. But so you have to get along, and you have to figure a way to get along. And the best way to do that is to do your job well, be considerate to the other person, and have a hell of a sense of humor.
Oh, right.
That's a big one.
And in those days, the 80s, 90s, and even on, there was very little thought given to the health and well-being, the mental health, as well as just providing food. Everyone would, the band and the artists would get extremely well treated, and crews for a long time do we have time to get down to a shop and get a meat pie or something like that, and no consideration was really given to the psychological toll that can be taken on some people, particularly with that incredibly grueling 12 to 18 months and not a lot of sleep, not a great diet, being away from home. That must have been hard. And have you noticed it changing over the years?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly hard. It was, I mean, it's difficult now, but I have to say it was more difficult then, like you say, because there was no catering. There was no showers after the gig. There was no bus you could go and lay down and sleep in while the driver takes you to the next show. All of those things just didn't exist, and so as far as like your health and safety, there was nothing. There was no doctor there. If things got really bad, they'd bring a doctor in to give you a mega vitamin shot, and they'd shoot up the whole crew at the same time, only because we were only because we're literally dropping dead on our feet, and because everyone knows if one person gets sick, because you're in such close confined quarters, that if one person gets sick, the whole crew gets sick, So that's what we lived on. I mean, there were a couple of tours where we lived on mega vitamin shots, you know, and there was this doctor that they used to fly in from England to Europe, and he'd just like follow us around, jabbing us in the butt with these injections, and we never even asked what were in them. All we knew was it made us feel better and we could do the gig, you know, so God knows what we were getting shot up with. But you know, now there's guidelines to be followed. You know, there are health and safety guidelines. There are, you know, it is considered, it's taken into consideration, and the crew is protected. I mean, you know, there wasn't even security, you know, that like after a show, you know, if it was a show and something, the audience weren't happy, then the road crew after the show was fair game. You know, you'd have to fight your way out of a venue, you know. So, I mean, thankfully that's changed, but that's only changed as a trickle-down effect. It's not changed because all of a sudden they love the road crew. It's changed because they realise that there's money to be lost if we don't do our job on time.
Yeah.
You know, if we don't get it up there, if we don't get it in, set up, in the air, ready to go, when those doors open, they're going to lose money. So they have to look after us, you know, and it's the same with the musicians. You know, they've figured out that they need to schedule it in a way that, you know, that the musicians can cope with it, you know. So, and again, there's different levels, you know, depending which level of the industry you're in. You know, if you're at the very top, you know, there's obviously a lot more care taken. There's still young bands starting out that have it very similar to how we had it. You know, so just depends where you are in the big scheme of things, you know, but at least there are guidelines now.
And we're already getting close to asking for questions. I told you it would go quickly, but I loved your the dedication in the book, Tani. So this book is dedicated to every young girl who has ever dared to dream of more, and more is in capital letters, you know. I mean, that's obviously, I mean, that's the main thing I think people take from this book. I mean, they're great stories, but it is very much an aspirational, you know, if you want it, try, you know, just go for it. And that seems to be your philosophy.
Absolutely. Absolutely. No one should ever sell themselves short, and no one should ever listen to anyone who tries to sell them short. Just if you've got something that you've got your eye set on and you want to do it, it's going to be hard work. I mean, it's not going to fall out of the sky and hit you on the head, you know, but, you know, if you're prepared to put in the work and go for it, then don't let anyone tell you no. They don't have the right to do that. So just do it, but be prepared, hard work, pay attention, go for it.
And we're in 2021. You know, if anyone's watching this, or you know, parents are watching this, kids, you know, people who've got aspirations, is it a good world to be in? You know, is it you know,
it's a more acceptable world to be in now. You know, I mean, parents are paying for their kids to go to college to get degrees in being sound engineers and lighting techs and stuff. You know, stuff that we never even heard of. You know, so you know, the fact that it's accepted and condoned more by parents, not all parents, obviously, but, you know, the parents who see a desire in their children and are prepared to support them, I think that's a wonderful thing. You know, they need to understand that once they get out on the road, it's going to be a different environment, and they're going to have to still work hard, do all the groundwork and work their way up again, whether they've got a degree or not, because it's different out there. It's a different world. You know, every day it's a different venue. You know, someone can walk up to you one day and go, okay, you need to lose a third of this. It's not going to fit. Well, if you don't know why you set something up, you only know how to set it up, then you've got a big problem. You know? But, you know, that's the sort of thing that you've got to be able to do. You've got to be able to think on your feet, think outside the box and go, okay, right, how are we going to do this? Got it. This is what we're going to do. Boom, boom, boom. Because you don't have time to complain.
It struck me when I was researching my book that the crew don't ask if something's possible. Their only mindset is, how do we do this? You know,
absolutely.
What does it take to get it done? You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. It's like, this needs to be done. We can't make excuses. That's not what we're here for. So how are we going to make this happen? You know, and off you go.
Right. Well, off we go. Let's take some questions. What do you reckon?
I think we've got quite a few, so let's try and get through some of them. Thanks, guys. This has been a fantastic event, and we've had lots of people just popping in to say that they're loving the conversation.
Great.
Cheryl McDonald has asked, you've answered a lot about the differences between how it was then and how it is now being a roadie, but do you think that it was more fun back then in a freewheeling years than now when it's a little bit more regulated?
Well, we could get in more trouble, which we love doing. Without being frowned upon. Now it gets a little bit poo-pooed and frowned upon. So, you know, I kind of like the Wild West days. You know, you could get away with blue murder and you could have a ton of fun and still get up the next morning and do your job.
Great. There's a question here which I don't understand, but I'm going to ask. Marshall has asked, was Status Quo a Tasco account? And if not, who? Hey,
Marshall. Status Quo became a Tasco account after they took a year off for tax purposes. I then took the rig to Tasco, and that's how that was Tasco's first lighting rig, because up until that time, they were just a sound production company. So that's how I became the head of their lighting department. I bought a lighting rig with me. So that was a good move. So yeah, that's how that happened.
Okay, and Steve has asked, hi Tana, I'm halfway through your book and absolutely loving it. My question is from an emerging artist perspective. From your experience, what are some of the common traits that some of these bands, acts had that you think helped them be successful? In addition, what advice and tips that young bands performers should focus on in pursuing their dreams? So from your perspective, what made the band successful and what are some tips?
From my perspective is it's about work ethic. You've got to have a strong work ethic, and each member of the band needs to be on the same page, because if you're all seeking different things or you're seeking things for yourself and not as a band, as a group, then it's not going to last. So work ethic and get on the same page and be honest, because if you're just pretending to be on that same page, it's going to become really obvious really soon, and you're either going to be gone or the band's going to fall apart. So that would be my two suggestions.
Great. And Becky has said, what did you hate about that first bus?
Oh, it was a pig of a thing. It broke down constantly. It had no heating. It had no air. It constantly broke down. We had to push it. We had to push it with all the equipment in the back of it. So it was like outrageously heavy and difficult. And the seats were like something out of like an Alcatraz prison. I sort of simulate it to, you know, they were metal frame bench seats with maybe some sort of something over them. It wasn't leather and it wasn't cloth that I could make out. I don't know what it was, but it wasn't padded either. So it was just horrible. It was a nightmare.
That sounds like
but the fans loved it.
Fair enough. Hey, Zorro is on here, and Zorro has asked, can you remember who first showed you how to coil a cable correctly? And from memory in Stuart's book, it might have been the crew from a Melbourne band, Fox. Is that true?
Absolutely, it was. Now, I can't remember his name, the stage guy with Fox, but that was who showed me. They gave me the job. The first job I ever got was to dismantle the drum kit and put it away. I guess they figured I couldn't hurt myself too much doing that. And then when I had that all figured out and done and was standing there going, okay, what next? They thought they'd stump me with a cable because they said, it's got to be done a certain way. And they did it really quickly. And I'm like, okay. So I did it, and then they're like, oh, okay, she can coil a cable. It's important to know how to coil a cable the right way. It really is. So yes, it was Fox.
Great. So there's Joe here who's saying, what are you doing now, Tana, apart from obviously promoting your book? What else are you doing in your life at the moment?
So obviously with COVID, there's nothing going on in the music industry whatsoever. So what I'm doing is I'm completing a certificate program at UCLA in creative writing. I'm enjoying that immensely. I've got one semester left to do, which I'll start once this is over with the book. And I'm also working on a project which is a living history on production in the Australian music industry. So it starts in the 60s and goes through to, there's going to be different parts to it, but the bit I'm working on now is from the 60s through to the millennium. So it will include, you know, people who actually did the work, people who designed the equipment. It'll have pieces of equipment in there showing the evolution through the decades. So that's a project that's really near and dear to my heart. So I'm looking forward to getting that off the ground.
God, that sounds fantastic. We'd love to be selling that book for you. So I can't wait to finish that one. So someone without a name here has asked, how do you pack a truck? Eric Robinson told me in the 80s, it is not like packing a handbag.
You pack a truck so you use every inch of that truck. And you know what? You've got to have an eye for it. You really do have to have an eye for it because it can make the difference. I mean, I have a really good eye for packing a truck, and I would always pack the truck because I could get so much more equipment in there. Like when you're lifting a heavy case, if someone's going, okay, it goes on top, and then you get it up there and it's like half an inch, the roof's half an inch too low and everyone's struggling with the case, you know, but I actually have a great eye for that. So yeah, you pack it so, you know, nothing's traveling on wheels, tip what you can tip, don't tip what says do not tip, you know, so there's a plan to it. Load bars come into it as well, but you've got to have an eye for it as well.
Great. And Lorraine has asked, what tour crew were you on that you ever wished you ever said, I don't ever want this to end? Was there one?
You kind of get a little tired towards the end. you kind of go, oh, thank God we're going to have a bit of time off. But I don't know. No, you know, I think you're kind of happy when they end because you know there's going to be another one coming and it'll be a whole different experience. You know, I mean, there's been a lot of enjoyable tours that I've done, but I don't think I ever want to be on one perpetually. No. That's kind of a little scary thought, that the Groundhog Day of tours. No.
Couple of last questions here. So Michelle has said, have you ever thought about becoming a university audio professor?
No, because I didn't do audio that long and it's changed so dramatically since then. And, you know, the other thing is I didn't actually graduate high school, so I don't know if I could be a professor. I don't know if they'd let me in. I wouldn't have problems. I mean, I've actually been, you know, a guest speaker on a few different classes and things like that, which I enjoy immensely. So I do enjoy it, but I don't know if they're going to give me a professorship. I'd have to sneak in the back door like I normally do.
Sure, they'd let you in.
I'm open to it, though, if they want to.
I think this one might be our final question, and it is, hi, Tana, was there anything from your boarding school experience in Toowoomba that prepared you for this extraordinary life?
I think learning to get on with people who you don't necessarily have a lot in common with. You know, in a boarding school, they put you in a dormitory and that's the people you're with. And you're with them for that year or, you know, at least a semester, usually for the whole year. So, you know, you find out how to make things work. You know, it also makes you really independent and you have quite a stamina for self-survival as well in a boarding school. So I think all of those things put together probably helped me. I didn't realize it at the time, but yeah. But the other thing from boarding school is that I really am thankful for is there's something about a boarding school education where it does help you interact with all sorts of different people. And I've been aware of that on several instances where I've been, you know, whether it's at, you know, Windsor Castle with the royal family or whatever, that I think, you know, if I didn't have that little bit of education, I may not have been able to handle this as well as I did. So I think it's something that's a good thing. It was a good thing for me.
And a few people have actually asked about that record on the wall behind you as well.
That's the band Tool. So they were a client of mine when I was doing logistics, and as a thank you, they gave me a platinum album, which was a nice thing. So it's good, yeah, working with different bands, and they're a great little band. I mean, I really like Tool. They were just doing a tour when COVID hit, which is unfortunate. Their lighting design is fabulous. The guy they've got now, excellent lighting designer. But don't know what his name is, but he's good. He's good.
Right. Look, and all the rest of the questions here are not questions, they're just comments about how amazing this event has been. And the two of you have really made it a fun afternoon for people. So thank you, Stuart, as well, for doing that, for doing such a great conversation. And thank you, Tana, for being with us all the way from over in America.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's been an absolute joy. And of course, we've recorded today and we're going to pop it up on our YouTube channel. So in about a week, people can relive any of the conversation that they want to go back and have a listen to. Thank you so much, both of you, for being so great.
Thanks for turning up, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for coming.
See you later. Bye.